point to start. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's learning session. All right, and for today's session, our main focus will be on best practices for road mapping success. So we'll go through a bunch of great tips and tricks on how to get your roadmap up and running. And although we'll be using a combination of slides and demo, but most of our time will be spent in demo. So get to see the product or Roadmunk in action. And on that note, I'll pass it on to you, Cody.
Thank you for the wonderful intro, Dua. So today I'm going to walk you through road mapping as well as take you through a demo. Excuse me. So road maps in general. So what are they? They're high-level visual representation of a strategy. It answers the questions of what, who, when, and how you go about your key deliverables. So with road mapping, how we win. They're very user-friendly. It's very easy to use, easy to access. They're very beautiful, visually appealing. They're very flexible, so it's really easy to make pivots when you need to. Of course, they're shareable, so we have a lot of exporting options. And then lastly, they're very much supportive. So we have a lot of integration options, for example, where you can integrate there. So elements of a successful roadmap. We have naming conventions, account field standardization and management, role management, and then template building. I'm going to be talking about these throughout the demonstration. But with that said, we have road mapping for admins, a future learning session, where we will cover a lot of these in greater detail. So firstly, with naming conventions, the purpose of naming conventions is to ensure that you're standardizing how you're naming your roadmap within your organization. It's a very important concept to have because you want to make sure that your teams are naming according to how you want it to be structured. So let me just open up this to show you what it might look like. So the tier 1, you might use RM. For tier 2, you might use product, for example, and then tier 3, PM. So the concept here, when you're using naming conventions is to ensure you have that governance in place on how you're going to name your roadmap. So not just at a roadmap level when you are exporting these roadmaps so individuals know exactly the information within it, but also when you're building a portfolio, which is a name I'm going to be talking about a lot throughout this demonstration. You want to make sure that it's very clear with the what data is within each roadmap by following these naming conventions. In addition to that, we have field management. So it's very important that you're aware of the difference between account fields versus roadmap fields. You'll notice on this page here, what I'm currently showing are roadmap fields. So you can notice the difference between roadmap fields and account fields because the roadmap fields on your accounts are going to be a little faded out, whereas when you can see the account fields, they're going to be more bolded. And you know exactly what I mean when I click here. So you can see the difference in the boldedness versus the fadedness. But more importantly, the difference between the two is when you're working with account level fields, you can use them across your account. So everyone on your team will be able to use these account fields and align your values and data together. And then, of course, loop everything into a portfolio roadmap. Whereas these roadmap level fields, they're only going to be used on an individual roadmap. So if you're working with roadmap fields, they're only going to be visible on the current roadmap that you're working on. And then I just wanted to touch up a little bit on custom templates, and then I'll also show you this during the demonstration. But the purpose of custom templates is to make sure that you're utilizing all those best practices with account fields, with naming conventions. And then you're able to create a roadmap, structure it the way that you want it to be structured, provide the necessary formatting, color palette, set up your views in place. And then when you're ready to do so, you can create a custom template, and then the rest of your team will be able to work off of this. So I'll show you how to do this during the demonstration. And then lastly, again, full circle, making sure that I mentioned portfolio many times, and I'll show you this at the end of the demonstration. Portfolio road mapping is where you can loop up a variety of roadmaps together, make sure you can align the data, show those projects how they're going to be aligned, and then of course see that big picture there. So it's a very great concept to use when you want to see multiple projects combined into one there. So I'm going to continue with the demonstration here. So I'm going over to Roadmunk now, and I'll be showing you how to build a roadmap from starting with a CSV file, and then of course show you some best practices along the way and lead into a portfolio. But before I do that, I want to go through some basics. So for example, showing you the interface here, as well as going into some detail on things such as the account settings and our announcements page. So if you go to the bottom left of the screen here, you'll notice that your account settings are here. And I highly recommend going into here and making sure that you do have it set up for your team's success here. So I'm going to kind of go through a bit of a role play and a use case here by considering myself as a product manager. So as a product manager, I want to make sure that my account is set up for success for the rest of my team. So I'll make sure that I do have not just my profile set up, but the necessary user setup as well as my team setup within the account here. First thing I do always like to recommend is to make sure that you go to from the profile tab to the email notifications and set up, make sure that this is all checked here. So for example, if someone's trying to get in touch with you through the comments section, you would be able to get notified by email rather than having to come onto the application and go about that way. In addition to that, I'm going to switch over to the users tab and just show you a couple things here. So firstly, this is where you would set up your team. You would be able to add your collaborators, reviewers, and account admins, as well as manage those roles once they're here. So for example, as I click on invite users, you'll see that you need to put in your email, provide the necessary role, and then put the individual's name there. So for example, if you would like to add another account admin to your account, someone who has those full capabilities and responsibilities, then you would add that account admin. But if you're looking to give somebody more of that access to be able to create a roadmap, they'll be able to share the roadmaps as well as be added to roadmaps to edit. That would be a collaborator license. And then that reviewer license, that's more of that read-only license. So individuals who you would give the reviewer license to, you would be putting it on your roadmap to simply view it and comment on it. Lastly, what I want to show you specifically in the account settings is if you switch from the users to the teams tab, you'll be able to see that you can set up your own teams here. So I have the product team set up as I'm a product manager, and I want to make sure that my team is set up for success here. One of the reasons you might want to have this set up is because when you are adding, rather than adding individuals to a roadmap, you'll be able to add a team instead. So it's very helpful to not just keep things organized, but it's going to make it simplified when you are looking to add teams to your roadmaps. And then lastly, on the homepage here, I'm going to go to integrations and just mention that if you are looking to add an integration into your account, this is where you would do so. And in addition to that, we are having a learning session next month that is specific towards integrations. So if you have any questions about integrations and want to see that process, definitely come to that. All right, and then just a couple more things here on the side panel I want to show you before I get into building a roadmap and portfolio roadmap. Firstly, I want to highlight the support tab here. So firstly, there's the contact us button. So if you are looking for some support here, our customer support team is very knowledgeable. They're very quick to get a response to you. We have Nora on the call here with us, so definitely reach out to the support team. They're very helpful for that, as well as we have the knowledge base here. So if you click on the Help Center, it'll bring you to Roadmunk's knowledge base. So a lot of our information is within here. If you want to do some self-learning, learn about some things such as our integration options, some updates that we've been making over time, learn some new features that we have, definitely come to this page. We do have the link to this in the slide deck that you'll be able to receive after this learning session. So definitely take a look at that. All right, and then the last thing I want to highlight here is the announcements. So this is where you would see some new features or some updates that we're going to be making over time on this announcements tab. And in addition to that, you can even see the learning session has shown up here. So it's quite helpful to get up to date with what's going on with Roadmunk. And then the last thing I'm going to show you before I go into building a roadmap is simply at the bottom left of the screen, you'll also see your field options are here. So if I click on account fields, for example, I mentioned the importance of having account fields because that means your team's going to be able to align on the same fields, the same values within it. And then you'll be able to align this data for a portfolio roadmap. So it's very important that before you start building roadmaps, that you do come to this account fields page. Click on the top at the top right of the page, the plus account field button, and make sure that you're setting up those account fields so that you can align on that information there. But I'll go again into a little more detail when I show you building a roadmap. All right. So next, we're going to be talking about building a roadmap. So I'm going to go to my all roadmaps here on the top left, and then to the top right of the screen, the plus roadmap button. So firstly, you do have an opportunity to create a portfolio here, which we will get to later on in the demonstration. You also have an opportunity to create from a template. I'll go into this a little deeper into the learning session as well, because I want to show you what it looks like, how when we're going to create a roadmap together, you can create that template, and then we'll go to this page here and I'll show you exactly what that looks like. But for now, we're going to click on new roadmap. So this is when you're going to have to create the name of your roadmap. And again, naming conventions is very important here. So let's call this product development. We're the product team, so we're going to name it product team. And then let's call this product plan 2023. So this is going to be the page that it brings us to. And the purpose now is to make sure that you get your data on this page here. So there's a few ways of doing so. Of course, you can add an individual item by clicking on the top right plus item. And this will give you the opportunity to name your item, provide a date, and then highlight any fields that you would like to put here. Another option you have is right next to that is the integration option. So any of those integration options that you did set up within your account, you would be able to put here. You simply just click on one of the options such as Jira, and then follow the necessary steps. Again, we're having a learning session next month related to integration, so definitely check that out if you want to learn more about that. But the way that we're going to get our data on the page here is I'm going to import it through a CSV. So right next to the integrations button on the top right of the page, we're going to click import through CSV, and then we're going to drop a CSV here. So now we're going to look through for one of our CSV files, and this matches the one that we're trying to put in here, the product development, product team, and product plan. Once we have uploaded this, the next step is to make sure that your fields in your CSV file do match the fields in Roadmunk. So as I go through here, I do notice that there is one called resource that is actually not going to be an account level field because we don't have that within the account. And then also bucket, we don't want this, so we're not going to import this. But with that said, let's click next. And then import as new, update and overwrite. So this is going to bring all of our information on the CSV file onto Roadmunk, including the fields, as well as any information such as a product description that will also be brought here onto Roadmunk. So now that you see all of these fields that are bolded at the top, as I mentioned previously, these ones are going to be the account level fields. We've already set up account fields within the account. So because the same names of the fields in the CSV file match the account fields in Roadmunk, they're going to be matched here as well as the values, and we're going to be able to use this on the portfolio level. With that said, this resources field, we actually noticed that this wasn't a field within Roadmunk. It wasn't an account level field. So by default, it's going to come in as a roadmap level field. And if I click on the settings button next to resources, you'll notice that it even tells you here, this is a roadmap field. So what that means is that it's only going to be visible on this product development roadmap that I'm currently showing you. However, if you do want this roadmap field to be an account level field so that you can use it on other roadmaps, and then of course, loop it into a portfolio roadmap, all you have to do is go to the bottom of the card here, select more actions and promote. So now this resources field is going to be an account level field, and we're going to be able to use it on other roadmaps as well. So in terms of the different fields options, we do have a few different ones, including list, multi-select, and text and team member. So they're all great for their different reasons, but one that I really want to highlight is the number field. A number field is definitely one that I would recommend including on your roadmap. And that one of those options you'll see here, I have progress completed. That is a number field. I recommend having this because when you do create your timeline in swim lane views, you'll be able to track the progress of those individual tasks along the way. So you can see here that some of my tasks have 100% complete, 80% complete, and they'll actually highlight that on the timeline in swim lane view as well. So definitely recommend including that within your field options there. So you'll notice that when you look at this page, you do see all of your field options, the date, and the name of your item. But if you do click on one of your items, such as this database improvements, you'll notice that you have a lot more opportunity to include more specificity about each of those individual items. So for example, I have a pretty deep description about this, this item here on our roadmap. And it's very helpful because we can even include details about who the owner is, some key dates that we might have, as well as you can include links and attachments as well as images. So definitely a great source to use if you're trying to include more detail. And I highly recommend including more detail because the more details you give within your individual items, the clearer it's going to be for anybody who is who's going to be added to this roadmap, whether they're a reviewer, whether you're exporting it to stakeholders or customers, they'll be able to see this detail here. So the more you include, the clearer it's going to be for them, not just for this individual item, but of course, the bigger picture on the entire roadmap that you've created here. So what we actually notice here, you can see the key dates. You actually have an option to create some key dates on the right side of this card here. So if I click on add key date, you'll notice here that you have the option to add dates to your item. And this is definitely a really great tool to use if you're trying to break your items down into smaller phases along the way, those little milestones, and track, maybe a high priority item, maybe an item that expands across multiple dates. So I would highly recommend utilizing this function in order to track that data there. So for example, I'm going to put phase 1 and we'll go with January 9th. And then if you want to add more key dates, just click on plus key date and we'll put phase 2 here. And for this one, it's March 5th. So it's really easy to do that. In addition to the key date option, at the bottom of the card, you'll see that you have a chance to add a comment. And it's really easy. You just need to add one of the individuals within their account. So I'm going to select Hendo. And then all you have to do is provide any comments that you would like to do to this individual. So as the product manager, I might want to get in touch with Hendo and see, maybe I want somebody else to be working on this task. So I might ask, should Omar work on this instead? And then I'll post this. Perfect. With that said, you'll also notice since I switched to the Fields tab to the Activity tab, this will also give you updates on the changes that have been made to this item card, including the comment that I just made. So not only are you able to track changes to the field, but you can see the comments here. In addition to that, as I mentioned earlier, if you keep your email notifications on, this will also be sent to that individual, so Hendo in this case, and they'll know exactly that I'm trying to get in touch with them to talk about a specific item on the card here. All right, so that's what I wanted to show you here on the all data page. I'm going to switch over to the milestones and just talk about a few things with milestones, some of the differences between milestones as items, as well as some unique features with the milestones here. So at the top left of the screen, you'll see that we're on the items page, and I'm going to switch over to the milestones. So with milestones, it's very similar to the items in that you still need to create the item with a name as well as a date. The difference between the items and the milestones is that with milestones, you need to select a very specific date on when it's going to occur. And then you also need to provide a milestone type. So we have some predetermined milestone types, including product launch, but you can also create them as well. So let's actually import some milestones into our roadmap here. Same process as when we were updating it with our items as well. So we're going to update our CSV file, make sure that the fields match here, and then we're going to field map it. Perfect. So now we can see all of our milestones on the page here. And as I mentioned, if you click on launch, you'll notice that we have a few options that you can select for milestone types, and then you can also create that milestone type. But I'll get into a little more detail when I show you milestones on the timeline view. And then as I just mentioned, in terms of the timeline view, milestones don't show up on swim lane views. So in case you were looking to use milestones, it's going to be something that your team is really excited to use. Definitely, I would recommend utilizing the timeline view and the milestones together for that. So in the top of the page here, you'll see the plus view button. And this is where you're going to create your unique views, your timeline view, your swim lane view. You can have multiple of each, so you don't just have to select one. It's just a matter of how many views do you need. And just as I mentioned, naming conventions for your roadmap, make sure that you're utilizing those naming conventions for your views as well. So I'm going to call this timeline by theme / owner. And this is really important to make sure that you are using naming conventions for your views as well, because I'm going to be organizing with my header and subheader by theme and owner respectively. So definitely make sure you're using those naming conventions so that when individuals do look at this view, they'll know exactly the data that's being represented there. So now that we're on our timeline page, what we want to do is to format the data here. Firstly, you'll notice in the top right of the screen, this is going to be a very useful set of tools here that you're going to be using, not just for formatting, but some of our options such as filtering, and then of course, exporting. But we're gonna first start by making sure that we format this timeline view. So firstly, we wanna make sure that we're aligning the naming conventions with the data we're gonna show. So we're gonna set that header as the theme here. And then also the subheader as owner. So you'll notice just with a couple of clicks, we have our header, subheader set up. The formatting for this is already designed very nicely. In addition to that, what we can do here is you'll notice that there's a couple of empty cells. We're going to hide those empty headers since there's no data there to clean it up even further. And then also I want to make these headers vertical. I think that will clean it up a little as well. So I'm going to make that small adjustment there. And you'll notice that our data is now formatted. It looks really nice already, but we still have a lot of options we can do here. Firstly, I don't want to see what's going on with each individual quarter. I would like this to be shown by months. So simply go over the quarter. So in this case, Q1 2023, and let's change this to months. I'm going to do that for all of our quarters here. And now you'll see we had a small update there just to show what's going on with these different tasks from each month. In addition to that, you have a lot of options in that formatting tab here. For example, I mentioned the importance of setting up a number field. With the number field, you can set up an account field such as progress completed, and it's going to show you the % of that task complete. So now we can see next to those items, for example, update API documentation, it's 100% complete. Apple Pay, that's 80% complete. If you don't see a percentage next to an item, it's just because it's 0% complete. It might be in the backlog. It hasn't been started yet. In addition to that, you can display your items or your milestones, or in the case that we're showing here, we have both items and milestones showing. So with that said, I'm going to switch from the layout to the colors tab here. And I'm going to show you how you can utilize color palettes to organize and color your roadmaps, your timeline, or your swim lane view to the next level. So firstly, you'll notice that you do have the option to use some of the color palettes we already have here, as well as you can provide a hex code in case you have a very specific one for your organization. But with that said, I'm going to color this timeline view by phase. I like to color my views by phase because it's going to show the progress of these tasks. As a product manager, I want to know very easily what has been completed, what's happening in progress, and then of course, what's in the backlog here. So I'm going to switch this to a citrus color. And then I want to get a little more granular. I want to control the headers as well as the individual item colors. So you can easily do that by going to the header. And let's say I want this to change to red. I can easily make that change, as well as the individual items. You can make the change there as well. So let's say we want completed to be represented as purple, and we would like backlog to be orange, whereas in progress to be green. So it's a really easy change to completely format this visualization here. In addition to that, so I'm just going to close this items bar here so we can get down to the milestones. you can control the icons as well as the color of those milestones. So for example, if I think a release should be an airplane and it's green, I want to show that this has taken off. We have a release happening. It's a really easy adjustment that you can make for your milestones, just as we controlled the coloring for your headers as well as those individual items there. So now you'll notice here on our tool or our timeline view rather, that you can see how it's already been formatted with a header, subheader. We've changed the color palette and we've controlled the dates here at the top. So a lot of changes can be made in just a few clicks. With that said, I do want to show you a couple of more things. Firstly, I'm going to show you sub items here. So with sub items, you'll easily be able to identify on your timeline view by looking for a toggle icon next to it. So for example, you can see here next to update API documentation that the toggle icon is next to it. And that's to illustrate that there is a sub item within this here. So you go down the card to the bottom here, we can see sub item. It's to show that reflect on API wiki is a sub item within the update API documentation. So sub items are a great tool to use if you want to break that parent item down into child items along the way. One thing I want to point out about the child items is that as you add more of them, these sub items within a parent item, it is going to fluctuate the date. So if I do add a new sub item to the parent item here of update API documentation, what's going to happen is it's going to extend the dates either before January 2nd or past March 7th if the date of the sub item does go beyond those time frames there. Lastly, with the sub items, you'll notice that you actually have an opportunity to toggle the sub items onto your visualization simply by going to the top of the screen to the top right and clicking toggle. So what's going to happen here is those sub items are now going to be visually shown on our timeline view here. So you can see, for example, language localization, all the sub items within it have shown up here. However, if you do notice that you have a lot of sub items and your visualization is a little busier than you anticipated, you can toggle it back off as well. All right, so now we're going to be talking about linked items, and linked items are definitely a really great tool to ensure that you can connect two or more items together. So the first thing I want to point out about linked items is that if you go to the legend on the right side of the screen, this will actually tell you the line relationship between linked items if you have any linked items set up. So we're going to come back to this legend once I've set up the linked item, and I'll show you what those line relationships mean again. So for example, if we want to connect reward and user avatar together, we can create that dependency there with a linked item. Simply go to the bottom of the card, add a linked item, and then search for that linked item you're trying to connect here. So now that I've connected the two linked items, what's going to happen is it's going to create a bit of a dependency depending on the linked item that I select. So what I mean by that is we have three linked item options. Relates to isn't going to create that dependency, but it's more of a reference to show that the user avatar and the reward do have a relationship with each other. This is where you could actually take the opportunity to use that description box to explain why these two or more items are connected with each other. In addition to that, we do have another two linked item options that do have a dependency with each other. So for example, if you select moves with, what's going to happen is these two or more items are going to move together on the visualization as well. So if you don't want to move all of your items a week back because let's say the project got delayed, you might want to use this moves with option. Just move one of the items and the other items will also move with it. So it's really great in those scenarios. In addition to that, we have the is blocking option. So when you use this option, it's a great way to ensure that multiple items that you link together are preventing each other from starting versus finishing by that dependency. And the easiest way to explain this is if you're working with a phase one item and you don't want a phase two task to begin yet because you want phase one to be completed, you might use this blocking by option. And I'll show you what that looks like here on our visualization. Let's just make this connection here. blocked by, and update the card. Apparently we're getting a bit of an error here, so let me try this with a different item instead.
Part of the excitement of a live demo.
Well, I think this one's gonna work, so we should be good.
Awesome.
Perfect. So now actually you can see when next to an item, if you see a number there, it's to show you that there is a linked item associated with it. So in our case, we see a 1 here with multi-account as well as forget password improvement. And what happens here is it's just showing you that these two have a linked item associated with it. In addition to that, you can see the dashed line there. And let's go back to the legend. Now you can see that the item links is going to show up here. So in this case, I mentioned we have that dashed line and it tells us that we are using that blocking linked item. But what I really want to show you here is if I'm trying to change the dates here on multi-account, you'll notice that it prevented me from starting multi-account before forgot password improvement because I created that linked item dependency. I don't want multi-account to start until we finish the forget password improvement. And that's why I would use a dependency in this case. So definitely linked items are a great tool to use, whether you're looking to create that dependency or if you're just trying to create some sort of a reference between 2 or more items. Okay, and then the last thing that I want to show you on the timeline view before we switch over to swim lane is the option to filter out data and get a little more granular. So again, on the top right sidebar, you'll notice there's a filter option here. And I'm going to select one of my favorite fields of owner. And then I'm going to select Alex. After I update the filter, it's going to narrow down the data just to what Alex is working on. So this is definitely a great tool if you just want to look at a very specific piece of data. And now I can visually see what Alex is working on across those different theme functions within our projects here. Now, with that said, one thing I always recommend when you're working with filtering is to make sure that you do clear the filter and update it again so that all your data does show up. I've seen before where an individual thought they lost their data and they simply forgot to clear the filter. So definitely one of the best practices I can recommend is to make sure you're clearing the filter so you can see the big picture again. With that said, let's switch over to a swim lane view because I also want to show you a couple things on the swim lane view prior to going to a portfolio roadmap. So again, we're going to click on plus view here in the swim lane. You want to make sure that you're using those naming conventions regardless of how many views you have here. So we're going to do a swim lane by, let's go quarters. And again, we want to see what each individual is working on across quarters. So we might use owner again here. And now that we have swim lane selected, let's create this. So now you can see this is the swim lane view, but it isn't set up by quarters. It's currently set up by months. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to that formatting tab again, and I'm going to change the column header to reflect quarters. And now that that has been fixed there, I'm going to go to the row header and then provide one of my existing fields, again, as owner, because I wanted to see what each individual is working on across the time span here. In addition to that, and just as we saw with the timeline view, you can provide, the item progress completed here. You can provide a label suffix, for example. So if you want to see, specific information in more detail, such as what team is working on the task, you can provide that there. So now we can also see that data dump, for example, it's the infrastructure team that's working on it, as well as you have those same options within the color palette to provide the necessary look that you want to show there. So if you might want to use phase again, you can use phase. And then you have the option to provide a little more specificity on the color again with the header and the items there. One thing that I do want to point out is you'll notice that milestone, you don't have the option to change it there, but that's because the milestones do not show up on the swim lane view. And then one more thing that I want to point out between the two views is that although you can see there's a linked item relationship still on here, so the forgot password and multi-account self-serve do show that one next to it to show there's a linked item there. If you go over to that legend, it's not going to show that line relationship on the swim lane view. So just kind of keep that in note when you are working between the two views, what functionalities show up on the timeline view versus the swim lane view. All right, so now we have a couple more things we want to do here since we're on the swim lane view here. What we want to do is we want to add our team to this roadmap. So let's get our product team on there, and then we're going to export the data. So at the very top right of the screen here, we're going to click on the plus button, and then it asks you to invite users. So what you can do here is you can invite all the reviewers or all the collaborators within your account. You can select the individuals as well. But if you do create up a team, it's definitely a great tool to use because I can simply select the product team. I don't have to look for those individuals. So this is a great way to stay organized and ensure that you're simply keeping things simplified in that way so that you don't have to look for the individuals and make sure that they are a member of the team. And in addition to that, as you do add the team here or individuals in that case, you can also provide them with edit access or the view only access. So if they do have a collaborator's license, you can provide them with access to edit this roadmap. So they can make some changes on it. However, with that said, if you don't want the collaborators or that team in this case to have editing access, you might give them the view only access so they're able to see this roadmap and comment on it, but they're not going to be able to make any editing changes there. In addition to that, I mentioned collaborator, but with that said, if you have a reviewer's license, you would only have that view only access here. So just kind of keep that in note in terms of adding your team to the roadmap. And then lastly, we're going to show how we can export this, whether it's to customers or stakeholders. So simply go to the top right and click on export. You can sync it to the calendar, also export through CSV. And then if you click on the top option here, it provides you to the next page where there's three options. So firstly, you have the PNG option. So this is a really cool tool to use if you are looking to include it into a slideshow, such as a PowerPoint presentation. You might use the HTML option if you're trying to embed it into an internet source, such as a Confluence page. And then lastly, we have this URL option, which is the most popular because it provides you with a lot of flexibility on how you can control things, such as the layout. You can hide specific fields. Let's say there's something very sensitive. So I'm going to go to the hide fields option here. Maybe I don't want to show the specific resources that are being used in this because maybe it's not relevant to a customer or it could be sensitive. So let's hide that field there. And then you also have the option to turn on real-time publishing as well as syncing to a very specific schedule so that when you are making changes in Roadmunk, the unique link will be reflecting that data over this period of time here. So now I'm going to publish this and I'm going to show you what it looks like when you do have a published URL and especially how it does look exactly how you formatted it on the swim lane or the timeline view there. So now you'll notice here that on this page, this URL that you can provide to customers, stakeholders, anybody without a license or with a license, of course, the data is going to show up the same way. And if you do click on any of the information, such as the PCI compliance, you'll notice that all your information is still here as well. So all the description you provided, any important links, any pictures you might have will show up here. Your fields will also be present as well, with the exception of those fields that you hidden. So as I mentioned, we want to hide that resources field. So I did hide it here and it's not going to show to anybody who has this link. All right, so before I take us to portfolio road mapping, I want to show one last thing, and that is the ability to turn this roadmap into a custom template for the rest of your team to work on here. So what you would do is you'd go to the settings on the top left of the screen, and you would select duplicate as template. So now we can see that we have the template set up. That's already the naming conventions we like. It has the account fields set up within here, the color palette, the formatting, as well as the visualizations. So what we're going to do is duplicate this as a template. And then I'm going to go back to the home screen and show you where you can find this. So now we're going to click on plus roadmap, new from template. And then you'll see here, the roadmap we just created together is an option as a template. So now anybody within my product team is going to be able to select this template. They'll see all the data, all the visualizations that we created, as well as those fields and the formatting. It's already been set up. They can use this template with all of the data that we've put in there, or they could start empty and just have that structure in place. So a lot of options on how you can create this template, as well as how individuals can select this and use it for their case there. All right, so now we're going to switch over to creating a portfolio, including the roadmap that I just showed you. And then also we're going to bring in a couple other roadmaps that I've created there. Let's go to all roadmaps. We'll go to plus roadmap, and then we're going to select new portfolio. So one thing I want to point out before we create the portfolio is when you do work with a portfolio, you need to select timeline or swim lane view. So different from when we are creating an original roadmap, just a standalone roadmap where you can have multiple views of each. With a portfolio, you need to select one or the other. So we're going to call this one our product team sync, because we want to show all the data together here. And then we're going to select our individual roadmaps that are relevant to the portfolio here. And you're going to see that I'm going to select our product development roadmap that we just created together, another product roadmap, and then an executive roadmap. We're going to combine these together. I always like to show on this page here that the ones that we are bringing in here have some very clear naming conventions. But you'll notice here with some of the other naming conventions I have, such as roadmap, there's testing, there's practice. These roadmaps with not so clear naming conventions can get pretty confusing when somebody's trying to bring these individual roadmaps into a portfolio. So that's why it's really important to use those naming conventions so it's very clear what data is going to be represented within each of these projects. And then of course, anybody who might be seeing this through an export, for example, they'll know exactly based on the naming convention, what's going to be shown here. So let's update our sources. And now we can see multiple roadmaps are synced together here on a portfolio, but we still want to do some formatting here. So let's go to the format tab. We're going to keep that roadmap source because we still want to keep the roadmaps a little bit separate, but we also want to see what each individual is working on across multiple projects here. So as I selected the subheader as the owner, you can see what multiple individuals are working on across these projects. One last thing that I do want to show you, as you can see, there's some empty cells. Definitely recommend hiding those empty headers so that we can just visualize the data we want to see here. And then in addition to that, as it is cleaning up, I want to highlight the filtering option one last time because I think it's even greater on a portfolio view than on the standalone roadmap, because you're working with multiple projects and then of course bigger sets of data. The filtering option is definitely a great tool in this case because now we can filter it by owner and see what Alex is working on across multiple projects here. So we can see what Alex is working on the product roadmap, the executive roadmap. It's a really great tool to use in that case. But as I mentioned before, when you are working with filtering, remember to clear and update that so we can see all the data again. I did select hide empty headers and the headers seem to still be showing. So let me see if I refresh this, if we can hide those empty headers. All right. And then the last thing that I do want to point out here specifically for the portfolio, as a lot of the functionalities are the same in terms of how you can format, use the filtering and exporting options, is if we do go to the all items page here, one thing that I want to highlight is if you're looking to add an item to this page here, you wouldn't be able to do so. You would have to go to a standalone roadmap. So whether it's the executive roadmap, the product roadmap, those are the places you would have to add those items to ensure that it does reflect on a portfolio, as well as if you're looking to make any editing changes to the items here. So for example, if I want to make a change to the budgeting, let's say I just simply want to call this budgeting plan now. And as I update this, you'll notice that I was able to make the change to budgeting plan. However, If you add individuals to this portfolio and they don't have access to the product roadmap, they wouldn't be able to make the editing change. So a really good practice when you're adding individuals or teams to a portfolio is to also add them to those individual roadmaps as well, if you want them to be able to make changes on the portfolio roadmap. So definitely a really good practice to use when you're working with roadmaps and portfolio roadmaps. But with that said, this is kind of the great use of a portfolio is you're able to roll up all these multiple roadmaps into one, see the alignment across projects, and then of course you can visualize it, export the data, and really see the big picture on what you want to display here for your overall company plan or team plan. So I hope this was very helpful for you today, going through road mapping with Roadmunk, and I look forward to answering any questions you have.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Cody. We do have quite a lot of questions, so I'll go ahead and start. So some of these came in as you were presenting, so they might point to a certain point of the demo. In the phase 1, phase 2 key date examples, do you advise having the key dates mark the beginning versus the end of the phase?
For sure. Let's go back to that roadmap we were looking at here. And we'll go to our all data page. So when you're working with these phase 1, phase 2, I would suggest just highlighting any of the, the big zones that you're looking at in terms of these phases. So if there's an important task you want to finish in phase 1 versus phase 2, that's the date I would highlight. And then of course, I would recommend having some sort of wrap up at the end, some finale. So I didn't include it here. So what I would do in this case is I would add one more key date and maybe say finish to highlight the end of this date here. So we'll select March 8th, and you can see here that we have a phase 1, phase 2, and finish. The project that you're working on.
All right. Another question that came in, I believe, about the status. What is the percentage complete based on?
So the percentage complete is a manual thing that you would have to enter. So for example, if I want to change the help bots percentage, let's say we're further along and now we're at 90% complete, you would just make that small change there. And then on your visualizations, it's going to get a little closer to being complete there.
Also, if you are building your roadmap from an integration, it depends on how you're measuring the status. So for example, if you're doing a Jira integration, you're measuring the status by the number of issues closed, then that's where it would come from as well. All right. Using templates provided, can I delete all the dates in one go instead of going to every single entry?
From a template?
From a template, yes.
So with a template, you can start from scratch. So for example, new from template, I can select the one we are working on, the product. You don't have to use the data here. You can simply select to use this template and start from empty. So it will be from scratch. You don't have to worry about having the dates or the fields imported in there.
All right, and another question. Can I add a custom icon for milestones?
So for milestones, let's go back to our roadmap here. This is actually a great time to show you that you can favorite your roadmaps here by clicking on the star, and I'll go to my favorite roadmaps. That way it's easier for me to get to it. So we're gonna go to the product development roadmap. Awesome, and then we'll go to those milestones there. So with the milestones type, you can see here we're on launch right now. You have the option to include a new milestone here. So you can add a name. And then of course, when you do go to the all data view there, or switch from all data view to the marketing timeline by theme. We can go to the format tab, switch over to colors. And once you're at the milestones, these are the options for your milestones. So it is a default, but you do have a select options here and you can control them for depending on the milestone type.
All right. I noticed the overlapping text on the left side header. Can we adjust the size?
So for Are
Yeah.
you referring to infrastructure, for example? So for example, we can control the layout of the headers. So we can change it to horizontal, for example. And then you'll notice here, if there's some overlap, if you want to make some changes to make sure all that data shows here, I can easily pull this along, make sure it's showing the exact specific information. So now I can actually read infrastructure rather than it kind of being cut off a little bit.
Right, awesome. Can you save a filter?
So for filter, you wouldn't be able to necessarily save this, but what I would recommend is you can actually duplicate a view and keep it on there so that you do have a view that has the filtering set up there. So for example, let's say I set up a filter and I do want to look at the specific owner, such as Alex on the tasks. I may want to duplicate this view. And now we can see here that I have a view that's already set up with the filter, and you might name it according to show that this is specific towards, one particular individual. So you do have the option to duplicate it in that case.
All right, awesome. Is there a downloadable template for CSV?
Yes. So in the all items page, if you click on import from CSV, there is an option to download a template here.
All right, awesome. One second, I'm just looking for a question we haven't answered. There's a lot of repetition. When filling the milestone dates, is there a way to copy and paste the dates rather than entering them all individually?
So if you're looking to control a variety of dates, for example, you can grab all of the items for in this case and just make a change to one of them. So let's just say I wanted to change all of them to June 20th. Now that they're all highlighted, I could simply select that yes, and then they're all going to be changed to June 20th. I will undo that though, just in case there's more questions about milestones.
Thank you. Another question that came in, I know we showed it, but let's show it again. Can you show how to access the publish function again?
The publish function, so when we export it?
Yes, exporting.
For sure. So let's go to our swim lane by quarters, because I believe that's where we exported this. And we'll go to the top right of the screen to the export. You'll also have, just by clicking that, you'll be able to see whatever you've already exported. So I can already click on the link and see that exported URL. So this is what it looks like for anybody you provide this link to. But with that said, if I go back here to the exporting, if I want to make a change, so if I export again through PNG HTML URL, you can see here that the publishing option is here, and you can even delete it as well.
All right, awesome. Another question. Okay. One of the questions here is, how do you delete a field? We have duplicate fields and it causes a problem with mapping when importing a CSV.
So there is a couple of options you can do for that in the case that you are looking to delete your fields. I'll first go to the home page again, so we can see account fields, roadmap fields. They are displayed here. So if you notice you have a bunch of fields and you would like to delete one, you would just select it. And then it's used on a roadmap. So if it is used on a roadmap, you wouldn't be able to do it in this case. So for example, you'll notice here that it's not going to let me, but it will allow you to archive it in that case. So what happens when they're archived is they will go to the archived fields. So you would be archiving your fields first, and then it will go to the archived fields, and then you would actually delete the fields in that case. But another way you could work around this in that case, it wants me to put in delete here. Let's just do that so I can finish that. Doesn't seem to be working at the moment, so I will skip over that. But in that case, you would be able to delete the field. But I also want to just quickly show you how you can merge fields as well. So let's go back to our favorite roadmaps, product development. And then we're going to go to our all data page. So let's say you had multiple fields called owner, for example. You would go to edit owner, the bottom left card, just as we were able to promote fields, you can merge fields. And what happens here, if you have multiple fields, in this case, let's say it was owner, you would simply merge that field into another field that you might have called owner. I don't have one at the moment, but if you did have 5 fields called owner, there's duplicate data. I would highly recommend merging those fields to create a one source of truth field so that everybody who selects owner, for example, is going to be using the same set of data.
Thank you, Cody. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.